Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of T-Dog RC, and this is episode 3 of my RadioMaster tips, and today's tip is going to be talking about trimming your model, and we're talking fixed wing here, or flying wing, so I'm not covering helis and I guess drones. You don't really tend to trim them too much with the radio. So you might think that trimming an aircraft is fairly straightforward. You take off on your maiden flight, have a look which way it's, get a feel for which way it's turning. Is it pitching up? Is it pitching down? Is it rolling to the right or left? And then trim accordingly. So it can be as simple as that, but if you've got a RadioMaster, there's a few tips and tricks that you may not know about. Some of these things, obviously, you may already know, but this video is for all those people that aren't aware, so you might be worth watching because you might pick something up. So first thing I will mention is that when you're trimming this goes for any aircraft, it doesn't matter what radio you're using. Obviously you want to try and get it mechanically set up as best you can. So start off with all neutral surfaces, get all the servos level, and then adjust your surfaces accordingly using the push rods and clevises or ball joints, whatever you've got, and make sure your surfaces are all nice and level. Then do a flight. If it's massively out of trim, it's violently pitching up, for example, or it's rolling to the right, and if you literally let go, it would do a complete roll or something like that, then that means obviously it's hugely out of trim. And what I'd recommend in that scenario is to try and land the thing and then adjust it mechanically again on the ground, whichever surface needs adjusting. Put some extra trim in by winding out or in the clevis or ball joint, and then fly it again. Most models, if you set the surfaces to neutral, in my experience, they don't really need any major adjustments mechanically, and you can do everything that you need to on the radio. So that's a good starting point, and that's where we're going to assume we're starting from now. So I've just got a little setup here, just a free sky radio, receiver, sorry, and then a little servo with a control arm on that, just to show you what I'm talking about. And I've just got this linked up to my Aileron channel. And for this, I'm using my RadioMaster Zorro, and this is running Edge TX as well, just so you can see what it's like on that. But it's pretty much the same as OpenTX if you're using that, with one exception, which I'll show you when I go into it. So first thing is, obviously, if you just want to use these trim controls, elevator and aileron, once you take off and you see how the plane's behaving, you can adjust the trims accordingly like this. On the RadioMasters, it does tell, or rather Edge and OpenTX, it does tell you when you're in the centre, which is quite useful. And one tip I've found is particularly if you're a novice and you've not got that much flying experience, it's actually quite difficult to trim and look at the model and control it and all that sort of stuff at the same time. So one tip I've got, which again this goes for any radio really, not RadioMaster, is that, and I can't really demo this on the camera, but is to try holding the radio up in front of your face whilst so sort of hold it level with your face for that first flight, and so really when you're glancing down at the radio, it's much easier. You're only just moving your eyes down to see where the trim control is, rather than holding it down here, which is perhaps where you'd normally hold it. It's much harder to look down, actually move your head and look down and then look back up again. That can be quite nerve-wracking, particularly, as I say, if you're a bit of a novice. So let's just assume we're going to trim this aileron out. And I'm going to just show you a couple of tips now that you can do on the Edge TX. So if we go into the model, and then we just go into the first sort of setting screen, which is the main setting screen where you set all your timers up, etc. You may or may not have seen before, and I appreciate you perhaps can't pick this up very well from the camera.
Telemetry lost. Telemetry recovered.
That's a bit better, isn't it? So here, if you scroll down a bit, you can see that you've got this trim step option, which is something that you may not have noticed before, and by default it's set to fine. So what this means is when you apply some trim, if you watch the servo arm, so I'll apply full right trim,
Maximum trim reached.
you can see it moves very slowly there. Hopefully you pick that up on the camera. I'll just move it back.
Trim center.
So I'd say it's moving about 1 millimetre per step, something like that. But what you can do is you can set this, if you go into this trim step option, which is quite a nice feature, is you've got medium and coarse, so it's almost like sandpaper. Now what I do is when I'm maiding in a plane, I actually set mine to medium. I've never actually used coarse, but I set mine to medium, and what it means is I don't have to put as much trim input in and be on the trim for as long as I would need to if I've got it set to fine. Oh, and this has actually got extra fine on here as well, but by default it's on fine. So what I tend to do is on that first flight I'll set it to medium, get it trimmed up pretty much so I'm happy with it and I can control it okay. Then I'll finish the flight off, land it, and then I'll go in and change this to fine, and then I'll take off again for the second flight. And obviously with it being set to fine, I can fine tune the trim then, because on medium you might find that when you trim it one way it's slightly too much that way, and if you try and trim it back it's slightly too much the other way. But once you set it to fine, you can fine tune that, as I say. So if I just change this to coarse, just to show you, like that, and then we move the trim and just watch that servo arm again. You should see that
Trim center.
it moves a lot quicker. Basically, it's hard to pick up on the camera, but essentially it's the steps between each click is bigger, and that's what it means by medium, fine and coarse. And obviously extra fine is even smaller. So that's the first tip I wanted to show you. Okay, so the next thing I want to show you is, let's assume that you've got it trimmed up, you're happy with the way it's flying, and you've just used the trim switches here. So I've got some right trim, you can see there. I've got it about midway between the halfway point and the right hand side. You can just make out there. So let's assume that's how I want it. You can then, if you go into the model settings menu, and again just keep scrolling across until you get to the outputs page like this. This is where it differs slightly to OpenTX. So one of the features, and again it's a feature that I really like, is on OpenTX, once you're happy with the way you've got the trim set up using these switches, you can then copy those settings by scrolling to the bottom of this screen and hitting that, which is trim to sub trims, and that will, whatever you've set using your trim switches, it will copy to sub trims, and then it will reset your trim switches back to the center. On EdgeTX, should I say, you can actually do it per channel. So if you just hold down on that, you see you've got that option there to copy trim to sub trim. And if I just hit that now, so it's added 7.4, you can see there on the sub trim. And if you actually look at the servo itself, it's slightly angled now to the right. But what that enables me to do is I can put a load more trim in.
Maximum trim reached.
So I've hit the maximum now. But then I could go back into this screen, copy the sub trim, and then it's given me 30, and you can see it's even further over now. And then if I wanted to, I could
Trim center.
reset it back to center and then go again and
Maximum trim reached.
keep moving that servo across. Now if you're doing it that much, then I'd probably suggest that you land the plane and look at it mechanically, because you should never need that much trim. You've obviously got some sort of issue if you're doing that, but it's a handy thing to do. And again, what I tend to do once I've got the plane set up as I like it using the manual trims, I'll go into this menu and just copy all the trims to the sub trims, and then I know that everything on my radio is set back to 0 in terms of these switches, and I can make more adjustments, as I say, if I need to. Something else you can do with EdgeTX as well, if I just go in here and let me just move this back to trim center,
Trim center.
and then let me go, whoops, back into the output screen, and I'm just going to reset channel 1. So now the servo's gone back to neutral, as you can see. Now one thing you can also do is you can actually hold, sorry I keep losing signal, it's a bit tricky, you can actually hold the stick to where you want it, and then go into the menu and select the option to copy trim to subtrim. And then if I let go of the stick now, you can see that that's actually moved the servo. And on here, that's added 65 subtrim setting there. So that's quite a lot, obviously. But that might be handy if you're initially setting the model up on the bench and you're just fine tuning it to get the surfaces level with the stick. You could use that option there to easily get the right setting. Okay, so that's the output screen covered. That's a handy section there, and it's you know, don't just use these switches. Have a look in that output screen and do that option where you can set the trims to the sub trim, and then you can reset these. It's a really good feature that I like on the Edge and OpenTX, and of course the RadioMaster, because that's what they use. So last thing I'm going to show you is something called instant trim, which to me is a bit like Marmite. You know, well, that's what we say here in the UK. You either love it or you hate it. A lot of people use instant trim, and you would use this on a momentary switch. So on this Zorro, the momentary switch is actually these buttons at the back here. And what you would do to set this up is you go into the menu again, and you page right across to
Telemetry lost.
special functions. So we're going to select that top line. I'm going to choose my switch, which is going to be this momentary one, so just press the switch. Then I'm going to go across to what I want it to do, and there you've got, it's about the third option in, you've got instant trim. So we're going to set that and we'll switch it on. Now what happens is, if I move the stick like that, you can see it's moved over to the right, and I hit my momentary switch. That's copied that setting into the servo, into the receiver, sorry. So it's copied it to the sub trim basically. So what you can do, if you've got that enabled, when you're flying, you can hold it in the position that you like, where it's trimmed up and it's flying level, and you can hit that instant trim button that you've set up, or switch, whatever you've done, and it will apply those settings to the plane, and in theory it will be trimmed up. And some people really like it because it's a really easy way to trim. But what you have to be careful of is when you've got the stick in that position, and you press it, it adds the trim position plus what you've then got it held at, if that makes sense. So if you're rolling to the right because you're holding it in, when you press that instant trim, it's gonna put that much trim on, but also because you've still got the stick in that position, it's going to roll it even more to the right. So you have to be careful, because what you can find is when you hit that switch, it ends up going out of control. So you have to be pretty quick with it and let go of the controls just after you've pressed it. Personally, I don't use it. I prefer just to trim manually, but it is quite a good option that's available and might be worth you having a go. It does make it very quick to trim. So just as a recap then, I've covered 3 things there. First one is going into that main menu and having a look at the trim step option and trying the different options. So there's extra fine, there's fine, medium and coarse. I'd recommend switching it to medium for your maiden, and then back to fine or extra fine once you're happy with it, so you can fine tune it. Once you've got it set up, the second one that we went through is going into that output screen and copying the trim switches to the sub trims, which then effectively stores your trim into the radio and lets you reset those trim switches to 0 and back to center. And then the final thing we had a look at there was the instant trim, which you enable in special functions and assign it to a momentary switch, and it allows you to instantly trim it from the sticks as you're flying. But as I said, you have to just be a bit careful with that one, because it can get out of control, because it applies the trim plus whatever you're holding at the time that you press it. So yeah, there we are. Hope that's been useful. I hope that out of one of those 3 tips, maybe you didn't realise one of them was available. I know I didn't when I certainly started using my RadioMaster. The trim step was one that I didn't realise that you could do until I'd watched a couple of other videos and probably had my radio about 6 months. So there might be a tip there that you've not seen before. And as always, if you haven't subscribed to my channel and you're into fixed wing RC, whether that's Balsa, Nitro, EDFs, bit of FPV flying wings, and of course we do cover some tech as well, then you're going to want to hit that subscribe button. It doesn't cost you anything to subscribe, so please help me out. I'd really appreciate it if you could just do that for me. Also, if you like the video, hit the thumbs up and give it a like, and if you've got any comments, then stick it in the comments below. Maybe you want to put how you use your RadioMaster to trim your model, what works for you. And of course, thank you to everyone who already supports the channel and all my current subscribers. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you soon for the next one.